All right, let's get this party started. Happy Tuesday. I can't believe it's already May this year. I don't know. Feels like it started yesterday, and here we are almost halfway through it. Anyways, thanks again for being here today. I recognize some of the names of attendees. I know there's some new faces as well. So let me give just a quick introduction. My name is Justin Shelley, founder, CEO, whatever title, Master Computing. I have been in the world of technology for, well, I mean, as a hobby. It started when I was about 12 years old. My dad brought home our first family computer, the Apple IIe, and I was instantly hooked and in love. Um, I, uh, I was just fascinated to sit there and watch him pull out, sound cards. And actually, I don't even know if a sound card was a thing back then, but definitely a modem. Our first modem, I remember that, the old dial-up days. Like I said, I was in love, and I've been involved in technology ever since. So don't want to age myself, but that's the better part of 40 years. Um, I started the company back in 1997, and we were really just a computer repair shop. That's all I ever saw it being. And but things have changed since then. Today we're talking about cybersecurity, and that is because I had the very unfortunate experience of watching a client get breached, probably almost 10 years ago now. But that was a game changer for me. I went from being a computer repair shop. My eyes were definitely on cybersecurity. I was aware of ransomware. We thought we had everything in place to protect against it, and I quickly learned we did not. And that was a very pivotal moment in my life and in my career. So I swore in that moment that I would never again on my watch allow a client to get breached. And I can gratefully say that that has remained to be the case. So today we're going to talk about a few formulas that I've come up with over the past couple decades of doing this. And so let's go ahead and just jump right in. As soon as I can make my computer advance to the next slide. There we go. Here's an overview of what we're going to talk about. Number one, nothing bad ever happens to me. This is a mindset problem that I'm going to address. This is the number one thing I believe that we need to change if we're ever going to win the war on cybercrime. We're going to go into the 4 highest risks. This is all high level stuff. We're not going to get into the details, but just the 4 categories of risks that we need to be aware of. My central point here is that 97% of these attacks could have been prevented. It's really hard to recover from a breach when it happens, but preventing them really is not that complicated. And then I'll show you how to do that. 4 steps. Again, this is high level stuff. I think the title of this when I advertised it was 12 steps of 12 securities you have to have in place. We're going to go over those here. I just put them in 4 categories. And then finally, the free offer here, the cybersecurity toolkit that we're going to get into as we wrap up. So with that, let's go ahead and reemphasize, guys, 97% of breaches, and this is just a statistic that continues to hold true, could have been prevented. This is tragic to me. We've worked so hard to build these businesses, to put everything in place. You know, I ache for people who are hit. And like I said, I saw this firsthand almost a decade ago. I may be getting ahead of myself. I think this comes up later in the slides, but I'll just tell you that it was an insurance company. It took us 3 weeks to get them back up and fully operational. This is a husband and wife team that ran the business. It just about caused a divorce for them. Definitely ended the relationship that I had with them. I'm not proud of any of this. It was just an eye-opener. It was tragic for everybody involved. And it is something that it can be prevented. There's just no reason to allow ourselves to go there. So really the hardest part of my job is this mindset, this concept that people think nothing bad can happen to them. If you haven't been I guess you can look at somebody who's been in a severe car accident will then typically be very careful driving. They'll be paranoid almost to get into a vehicle. But until something like that's happened to you, you become kind of complacent. It's human nature. I was interviewing a potential prospect, a potential client several years ago, and it was a small clinic, a healthcare clinic. We were talking about HIPAA regulations, and he said, and I quote, because I remember this word for word, I'm not worried about it. I'm too small to be a target. Now, I'm here to tell you that with that mindset, you absolutely are the target. This is exactly what the bad guys are looking for. And so that's what we're here to prevent. Go over a couple real world examples of breaches that have happened. There was a telemarketing firm that was attacked, and this is dated a little bit, about 4 years ago, almost 4 years ago. They were hit. I mean, it was unrecoverable. That part I remember, and they ended up closing their doors. Right, I think it was right before Christmas, and so 300 people are out of work. So I'm trying to keep this pretty high level, but it was a ransomware attack. They couldn't recover from it, and they were out of business. So again, back to my point of prevention. 97% of this is preventable, but once it happens, it can be impossible to recover. Sometimes there's some version of recovery, but almost always there is permanent damage done. This company I'm talking about here, the telemarketing firm, I just read it in the news. I don't have any personal information about it. But I can tell you that some more, I guess, personal examples, local stuff that happened. The city of Fort Worth, I think this again was back in 2019 or maybe even 2018, was hacked not long ago. And what, so again, I don't have personal information. I read this in the Star Telegram. That's where I get my information from. But through a series of breaches, they ended up losing about $500,000. And 2 IT managers were interviewed in this article, and they stated that 90% or the technology was 90% out of compliance. Now, I don't want to get too much in a tangent because we're going to talk about some of this later. But by compliance, I just mean following best practices, industry standards where security is concerned. 90% of the protections that they knew they should have had in place, they did not have in place. Both of these managers were fired, and they believed that they were wronged in the process, and they turned around and sued the city for $1 million. I think this is when I stopped following the story. I don't remember if they won that lawsuit, or I don't remember the outcome of that. But the reason I bring this up is because I truly believe that we have a culture problem where security is concerned. These IT managers, when they brought, I mentioned that they were out of compliance by 90%. When they brought it to their superiors, which I believe was the controller, the CFO at the time, they were basically, and maybe the operation, I don't remember, some key, higher management, they were told basically to sit down and shut up. And I'm pulling this from memory, but it was something to the effect of, if we take these recommendations to the board where we have to get all of our expenses funded and approved, they will be upset that we didn't have it in place already. We don't want to embarrass ourselves, so you need to just not say another word about it. These two on some level became whistleblowers, and that's why they were fired. So where I'm talking about culture, this is the problem. When people raise concerns, they're punished. And even take it from a different angle, you look at businesses that are breached and they're slaughtered in the media. They're fined by regulatory agencies, government agencies. We have this culture of punishing rather than rewarding and supporting when cybercrime is involved. It's something I'm not sure I really understand, but it is the case, and I'm certainly advocating for change here. This is something I believe we can take control of, and it doesn't cost money at all. We just have to change the way we talk, the way we train, and the way we reward our team members. So again, I don't have any personal knowledge of the city of Fort Worth, just read it in the newspaper, online. But there are a few personal examples I want to talk about. And one in particular, I know personally the controller of a small, medium-sized company here in the Dallas metro, multi-million-dollar firm, but they're not huge, few hundred, maybe 200 employees. And they were breached or they were defrauded out of $50,000. And quickly how that happened. It was some version of a business email compromise where somebody got into the system, they posed as the CEO, and they knew what type of transactions normally occurred in this business. And they just, the CEO was traveling, he was doing business, and an email came into the controller saying, hey, I'm about to make this purchase. I need $50,000 wired. The instructions are attached, and I need this done quickly. Please take care of it. And she did. And turns out it was not the CEO. That money was unrecoverable. All right. And that's a key point. The bank fraud, especially where money is wired, is rarely recoverable. So that was one that was a business, but there was also a case where a client of mine, and actually it was an employee of one of my clients, was doing a home renovation. I don't remember if it was maybe a roofing contractor or something like that, and the contractor was breached. So the criminals took control of the contractor's email. It wasn't even an impersonation. They actually had control. They had infiltrated the email of the contractor. So they were sending emails that were completely legitimate, could not be picked up by a spam filter, to this poor young lady who was, just trying to do some work on her home. And it was because the criminals watch the emails back and forth, they know what's going on before they launch these attacks. What they told her was, hey, remember yesterday when we said to mail us a check, because that's what the contractor had asked for. Instead of mailing the check, will you please wire that money? And here's the bank account information to wire it. And so she did. And here again, that money was unrecoverable. They called us in a panic. We tried, we tried to work with the bank. We tried to give them the best advice. We actually tried working with the contractor as well. But the money was gone. It was unrecoverable. And so for a young family, again, just trying to do some critical upgrades, renovations on their home, this was devastating. $15,000 is not a small chunk of change. So, this was another time where I've just said, this can't happen on my watch. And so I mentioned before that the ransomware attack was kind of a turning point, but that was a technology attack. They compromised the firewall, the backup systems, things like that. But in this case, now I'm starting to see a new trend where they're not even compromising the technology as much as they are compromising the people. And it was another shift in my perspective of what we need to do to combat this problem. So I used to be kind of a risk take. I mean, I am a risk taker by nature. A business owner, you kind of have to be, but I let that run my life way more than I should have. I just honestly did not believe that bad things would happen to me, which is just naive at best. That perspective changed dramatically for me when my son was in a motorcycle accident. God, I shouldn't talk about this kind of stuff. Anyways, that was the most horrific thing that's ever happened to me. And I switched from this mentality of thinking that bad things don't happen to realizing that no matter what the statistics say, bad things do happen. And we want to, as humans, I think we're wired to believe they can't happen to us. Probably because if we just ran around believing everything bad was going to happen to us, we wouldn't even try, right? Like, what would be the point? But when stuff starts hitting close to home, it changes your perspective. And so I do a lot of things more carefully now than I used to. And I mean, I wish this was something we could transfer, but it just seems to be, again, by human nature, that we have to have bad things happen to us before we take action to prevent bad things. So maybe it's futile, but I am going to try to paint this picture of how bad things can happen and why it's so important that we take action before. So a few statistics. 1 in 5 small businesses will get hacked. There will be some sort of a breach on 20% of the businesses this year, every year. That's just a statistic. So if you want to run that number out, you could kind of say that, in 5 years you're at 100%, but that's not really the way odds work. There's always the chance you will not get hit, right? But let's put this in perspective. Russian roulette, none of it. I cannot imagine that I'm talking to anybody on this webinar today who would load a bullet into the chamber of a 6-shooter revolver, spin that barrel and point at their head and pull the trigger, right? That's actually better odds than what I'm telling you. 1 in 5 is a worse statistic than 1 in 6. Still, we would never do it. And I'm here to tell you, like, this isn't true life and death, but a ransomware attack can absolutely be the literal death of a business. And so it's not only are we're looking at these odds that in some places we just would never consider, and yet for whatever reason we do in the case of protecting against cybercrime. The next statistic I want to emphasize is that the majority of people who are hit with a devastating ransomware attack, they don't come back. Like the telemarketing firm that I mentioned, 300 employees out of a job right before the holidays. So yeah, this statistic in particular says within 6 months, 60% of businesses that are breached won't make a return. They'll close their doors. And I have seen that, luckily the client that I mentioned before that I was personally involved with, they did make a return, but it devastated them. So many businesses do not have that. So again, lots of culture problems. This is a mindset problem. We believe that nothing bad's ever going to happen to us. I'm here to tell you it can, it does, it will. It is almost a guarantee that you will be breached in some way, shape, or form, especially if you're not taking the proper care. So let's go ahead and break down the 4 top categories of cybersecurity risks that I want us all to be aware of. And when I'm doing this presentation live, I actually like to ask the audience to take a guess at what the #1 greatest risk is. It's very rare that people answer this correctly. We'll usually think about having the right antivirus or firewall or whatever. But in reality, it's a people problem. The #1 risk in security is us. There's one of my favorite books as far as cybercrime goes. It's called Future Crimes by Mark Goodman. Great read if you're interested, if you're the least bit technical, and if you want to start losing sleep over this, go ahead and read that book. Now, the key takeaway for me towards the end of the book, after he scares the hell out of me about all the things that can go bad, he says, and I quote, "If you think technology can solve your security problems, then you don't understand the problem and you don't understand the technology. Cybersecurity is a people problem, not just a technical one." So this is a point that I like to drive home as well. Generally, the subject of cybersecurity is focused on technology, and that's critical. Yes, let's do that. But most important, we have to really look at the educational process, the culture process, the culture problem that we have. This is really where I believe we need to start. So part of the reason for this is that the criminals, they play a game of psychological warfare. We call it social engineering, but the human brain is wired, through evolution, through divine intervention, whatever your belief system is, we are wired to do certain things, to behave certain ways, and cyber criminals know it, they study it, they research it, and they exploit it. So one of the things, the primary thing that they exploit is that we are wired to want to help people. I can tell you in all sincerity that I am on this webinar today, that I'm in the business that I am in today because I want to help people. I love business. More than I love technology, I love business. And if I can do anything in my life to help somebody else succeed in business, I want to do that. That is a huge, powerful emotion that I live with. We all have some version of that, but generally speaking, we are wired to help people. Now, the other thing that gets exploited is that as humans, we are also wired to avoid conflict. And so an example here is somebody can call in a threat actor, a cyber criminal, whatever you want to call them, can call into a help desk and say, "Hey, I need to reset my password." And if the help desk person says no, because they're following protocol, then all you've got to do as a bad guy really is start to initiate conflict. You get upset, you start yelling at them, you threaten, I'm going to go to your boss. How dare you? I was told that, to contact you and you're not helping me. So I'm going to get you fired. Right. We as humans will run away, will shy away from conflict. And so these are two very key things that are used to exploit us. And this is what we try to train for. We secure your technology, but we also have a heavy emphasis on training and securing the human brain. So the second area that I want to talk about is bank fraud. So we've got the human weakness, the human element that we just went over. The next category of threat that we need to be super aware of is bank fraud. And the key point here, which I've already kind of touched on, is that once your money's gone, it's gone. It's very rare that a bank can recover money that's been wired, especially wire fraud. Credit cards, that's different, even debit cards. But when you wire money, there's generally about a 24-hour period where that money can be recovered. And beyond that, it's just game over. You can't get that money back. The client that I mentioned, or the employee of the client that I mentioned that had $15,000, she's defrauded out of $15,000. I can't say it was stolen from her. I mean, it was, but she initiated that wire transfer. And this was shortly after COVID. Everything was just crazy. And by the way, cybercrime went through the roof statistically during COVID. It was just insane. Anyway, so she called the bank hoping for some help. And the bank said, we're so backed up right now that it's going to be 45 days before we can even look at your case. Now, remember, I just said that you've got 24 hours to recover a wire in most cases. 45 days, it's not going to help. It's game over. And banks, I could expand this to say everybody right now is overwhelmed. We're living in some weird times, and most businesses are shorthanded. So it's just, again, once it's gone, it's gone. This is something that we need to be very aware of. A lot of our training focuses on this, on how to prevent wire fraud, any sort of bank fraud, I guess, in general. The third category of risk that we need to be aware of is mobile and cloud. I don't hear it quite as much anymore, but I used to hear all the time. People would say, oh, I don't need to worry about security because we're moving everything to the cloud. And I just want to shake them because what we've done now is we used to have this nice, neat little perimeter we could put around people with a firewall and other protections with technology and keep your data safe. But now as things move to the cloud and to different hosting platforms and different software, online, whatever, it's become increasingly difficult. It's more complex to know where your data lives and to protect against it. So it is actually a complication. It is not something that makes things any better or any easier. So that's risk number 3. And the final one where I want to kind of drive this point home, and all of this to some extent could be tied together, but ransomware is something that is just devastating. It's becoming more and more common. It's becoming more and more complex. It's becoming more and more diverse. It used to be early on when you got a ransomware attack, if you had a good backup in place, data backup, you could just recover from backup. And that's how I got myself into trouble with this client years ago, is I was following that formula, which at the time had been working. But the criminals had got in there and they had infected the network, the server in particular, for months. We never determined exactly how long, but they had been in there. They had lived in there for long enough that as we restored from backup, we were just restoring infected files. We ended up having to just delete everything and restore, like reinstall Windows, reinstall the server, and reinstall applications, and then move that data over one piece at a time. We couldn't move the operating system for any of the machines because they were infected. So backups are certainly not a complete answer. They're important, but they're not a complete answer. So there's a lot of layers that we have to put in place here for to protect against ransomware. So I'm going to come back to the point that I will just continue to hammer home that while this can feel hopeless, it can feel overwhelming. We're fighting an uphill battle, but I love this number. It should hopefully restore hope that 97% of these attacks are preventable. And it's not the most complicated thing in the world to secure our technology and to train our people, but it does take a conscious effort. One of my favorite sayings is you cannot get unhacked. 97% of breaches are preventable, but once you're hit, you can't get unhacked. I actually have a podcast on this subject. You can just look up Unhacked on, not hyphenated, by the way. I'm not sure why this is hyphenated. The podcast is just called Unhacked. It's on Spotify, Apple, Google, wherever. So the way that we prevent is through, we're not talking about a bunch of complex stuff, just basic security measures. And we'll review those here towards the end. We are talking about following industry standards. One of the points I want to make real quick is that there's kind of a misconception out there that large organizations have more resources and they do a better job of protecting against breaches, ransomware, and whatever else. And so smaller companies feel a little bit hopeless there because they think if they can't protect with their budgets, how do I ever have a hope of doing it? And this is where I just want to emphasize again that we're not talking about over-the-top security measures. We're just talking about the basics. Now, the basics require effort. They require culture. They do require an investment. There's a cost to all of this, of course. But one of the things I also teach is how we can make IT pay for itself if done properly. IT is generally looked at as a line item on a profit and loss statement, and there's every attempt to reduce that cost. Can we find a cheaper IT company? Can we find a cheaper employee? Can we find some way of cutting out this piece of software? And why would we invest in security awareness training? Because nobody takes it anyways. Let's reduce that cost. And when we look at it that way, we just continue to whittle away at the most important thing we can do to protect our businesses. And so I'm just getting ready to launch a second podcast where we're talking about how we take technology and we put metrics around it and we track it and we invest properly so that we can demonstrate the return on investment. We can actually make it pay for itself and then some. Sorry, that's kind of a little side note, a shameless plug for my upcoming podcast. But the final point on this slide is that we work so hard to get where we're at, whether we are IT managers of organizations or we're the owner of the organization. We pour our heart and soul into all of this. And this is where I get a little bit emotional about it. Like I can't stand, because I know how hard it is to build a business and I know how hard it is to keep things running smoothly. I cannot stand the fact that some thug can come and take it all away from us. And that has become my life mission, passion, whatever you want to call it, is to prevent that. Secondarily, only slightly below that, my passion is to find out how, to demonstrate and to execute on the plan of making IT pay for itself, to make it profitable. This should not be a drain on resources. Here we go, because I can't quit saying this. Guys, these attacks are preventable. We don't have to accept this as part of life. 97% of breaches, if they had these basic industry standards in place, could have been prevented. I cannot drive that point home enough. We have to stop this tragic reality. All right, so the 4-step formula, how do we, I've painted a little bit of a bleak picture intentionally. And I've kind of hinted about this along the way of what we have to do, but let's dig in. This is high level. It's intentionally high level. This is not meant to be a technical webinar. I'm more than happy to get in the trenches with anybody who wants to. And I'll show you how to get in touch with me here in just a second. But for right now, let's just talk about some basic concepts that we need to do. Number one of my little 4-step formula is we have to protect our technology. This is the most obvious. This is what people think about when we talk about cybersecurity. And so I'm just going to go over this relatively quickly. I'll first put my disclaimer that this is not a complete list. This is a starting point. And it's also, it's really important that we fine tune this for each organization because we're all different. But number one, we need a monitored endpoint protection. Think of this like an antivirus on steroids. It's got to be better than the traditional antivirus. And luckily, things are all migrating this way. It used to be that an antivirus just worked like a spreadsheet. Your computer would check to see if the program you just downloaded was on the spreadsheet as good or bad. If it can't find it, it must be good and it would allow it. If it does see that it's listed as bad, then it will not allow it. That's how antiviruses work. Obviously simplified, but today it's much more about the use of machine learning, artificial intelligence. I don't know, that's kind of becoming a bad word these days, but what it does is it watches for certain behaviors. And if those behaviors stray outside of what normal business looks like for the organization, it raises flags. And by monitored, I mean there needs to be a security team who watches these alerts 24/7. Another key point, we have to have two-factor authentication. Hopefully you know what that is. If not, it's like, you try to log in and it says, hey, I've got to send you a text message. Give me that code. That's two-factor authentication. This should be in place everywhere. It should be on your computer when you log in the morning. It should be on your email. It should be on your bank. It should be on your finance. It should be on your CRM, your client database. Two-factor authentication should be everywhere. And I will just say that, pardon my French, but it's a giant pain in the ass. I hate two-factor authentication with a passion, but it has to be there. Next, managed security patches. This is becoming more automated, which is good, but we all still have a tendency when, Microsoft pops up the warning saying, hey, you've got to restart your computer. Do you want to do it now or do it later? We have a habit of putting that off. So it's important to have a process around this and make sure that the patches are up to date. Password management is another one. Password management systems are not perfect, but they are critical. We as humans don't have the ability to remember, because if you follow the rules, every password should be super long, super complex, and unique to every website and application that we use. We don't have the ability to remember that. The only way to accomplish that is with a password manager. And I'll hear the argument that password managers get breached. It just happened to LastPass. I get it. There's no perfect system here, but I will tell you that I'm confident saying that a password manager with its associated risks is a better solution than not having it and relying on our weak human brains that just aren't designed for that kind of thing. So get a good password manager in place. And then really we need to make sure that we're doing regular security assessments. We need to know where our blind spots are because we all have them. All right, so that's protecting our technology. The next thing we need to do is protect our data. And this is, sometimes people think of this when they're analyzing cybersecurity, but if so, it's usually almost an afterthought. We need to know where what applications are we using? Where do those applications store data? What data is stored on mobile devices or in the cloud? Is it something that we have control over? Do we know where it lives? And is it being properly protected and backed up? And then here again, we need frequent, we call it shadow IT assessments, but we need to know if, we can run reports on our clients, for example, of every program that's installed on every computer. And we're going to look for things that are not authorized, that are not part of our protected systems. For example, if our company policy is that we store cloud data on Microsoft OneDrive or Microsoft SharePoint, and I run a report and find, any other cloud storage application, that's a red flag. And we need to be aware of that. And we need to make protections against that. We need to have a process there. Okay, that's step number 2. We're going to protect our technology. We're going to protect our data. And then as I've already made the point that the number one problem really is people. The number one weakness, I don't want to say problem, we have to protect our people. And so this is really just in the form of proper training, but also culture. The main point I have to emphasize here is we start at the top. If I, as the owner of my company, don't go through the proper steps, if I don't take the courses, which are annoying, if I don't take the little quizzes, if I don't get my score, my security score high up on there, on the leaderboard, then nobody's going to follow. Why would anybody else do it if I'm not doing it? Also, executives are the biggest target. So it's really, really important that the higher you are up on the, in the chain of command, the more you focus on proper training and protection. The next thing I'll say is we really have to create a security-minded culture. Culture. I will just continue to say that. Going back to the city of Fort Worth, and I'm probably going to get sued someday for talking bad about them. I don't know. But at least from what I read in the newspaper, their culture, my observation is that they probably didn't have a culture of security-minded people. And, when a problem was pointed out, according to the news article, I'm going to put the fine print in there, they were punished, not rewarded. We have to flip that narrative. We have to reward. If I've got an employee that comes up to me and says, hey, I believe that we need to up our security game, we need to do this, that, or the other thing, I may or may not take that recommendation, but I'm absolutely going to find a way to reward them for bringing that to my attention. So, find ways to reward good behavior. And then finally, we just have to be persistent and relentless. This is not a fun subject. It's not anything that, I don't come into the office and think, gee, how can I spend my time training my people about cybersecurity? But yet we have to weave it into our core culture so that it doesn't just slip through the cracks. So emphasizing again, this is the number one threat: people. The way that our human brain gets hacked, we can hack firewalls, but I'm telling you that it's way easier to hack a human brain than it is to hack a firewall. So don't let this one slip through the cracks. All right, the 4-step formula. We're in the home run stretch, guys. Thanks for staying with me. I'm probably not the most entertaining speaker, but this stuff is important. And so finally, after we've done everything we can do, it does come down to a cover your ass type of situation. And what I mean by that is that 97%, right? I keep making that point. What I'm not talking much about is the 3%, right? If somebody wants to breach you bad enough, they will. If somebody wants to break into your home bad enough, they will. I don't care how good your security is. If somebody wants to rob a bank and they are determined enough and they work hard enough, they will. So with that in mind, we're going to do everything to make sure we're not the low-hanging fruit. We're not going to be in that 97%. We're just not going to do that. But we do still have to be aware and protect it against those rare cases. And so step number one here is proper documentation. We just need to have policies and procedures. We need to have, what do we do? What's acceptable? What's not acceptable as far as how we use our technology? What do we do in the event of a breach? Who is the person that we're in the first contact? What do we contact the media? Do we contact the attorneys? Do we contact the insurance company? And in what order do we do it? Like, all this stuff needs to be documented so that when it happens and emotions are high, we're not sitting there scratching our head thinking, oh, dude, what do I do now? That we can't do. So the other thing, by the way, is we want to prepare against actual breaches, but unfortunately, we also have to prepare against the government. Hi, I'm from the FBI and I'm here to help you. Words you'll never hear. In the event of an audit, or say FBI, but any regulatory agency, and this can be CMMC, it can be HIPAA, it can be PCI, it can be there's a number, NIST. We've got all these different versions of regulatory agencies that we have to comply with. And so the first thing that will happen if you get audited is they will ask you for your policies and procedures. It's less, it's not that it's not about how you follow them, but it's more important that you have them, even than it is that you follow them. I'm going to put all kinds of fine print around that. I'm not telling you not to follow your policies and procedures. I'm just telling you that if they show up for an audit and you don't have them, they've just smelled blood in the water and they're going to go after you. And it's pretty much game over in an audit if you don't have your policies and procedures well documented. The other thing with your team, we need to set clear expectations. Again, what you can and cannot do with company equipment. Can you or can you not use personal equipment? Where can you store company data? This needs to be very well spelled out from the moment somebody's hired and then re-emphasized year in and year out. Then the last thing I'll say is that we really, even with everything else in place, please, for the love of all things holy, get good cyber liability insurance. If something bad happens, this is your kind of get out of jail free card. You know, the costs go up quick. We've got forensics, we've got recovery efforts, we've got data restoration, we've got whatever, people get their, you know, information stolen. We have to help our employees, our clients, our patients, whatever, because they've now been breached by proxy. So these costs just go through the roof. The cost of a cyber breach it's astronomical. And this is really why people don't recover from them. So make sure you've got good insurance in place. All right, let's wind this down. We're going to talk about, you know, we've been through all of this. I'm going to kind of say two things that conflict. I will all day long tell you that this is not a DIY type of scenario. I do not recommend that you try to handle cybersecurity on your own. If you want to try to install Windows on a laptop by yourself, by all means, YouTube that, Google it, figure it out, and do it. But if you want to try to protect your company from cybercrime, and I am talking about organized crime rings in Russia, that these people go to work in an office building, they work 8 to 5, they punch a clock, they have an hour lunch break, they have health benefits, the companies operate on a 20% profit margin. Like, this is not, we're not talking about somebody sitting in a basement in their underwear. We are fighting organized crime rings that are government sanctioned in some cases. So this is not a DIY situation. Now, that said, I am going to tell you about some free resources that I am more than happy to give out, because if you won't do all of the things I'm telling you, for the love of God, do some of them. Do something to take yourself out of this category of low-hanging fruit, to take yourself out of this, you know, category of 97% of breaches that could have been prevented. Let's not be one of those statistics. So if you don't take anything else from me, please take free cybersecurity awareness training. The number one threat, guys, is humans. It's the fact that our brains get hacked. Let me help you with that. There is no charge. There is no commitment. No strings attached. Policies. Let's see. Sorry, I'm getting too passionate here, and I'm forgetting to go with my bullet points. We customize this for you. No, see, now I've confused myself even more, because I was going down the checklist on the left. Policies and procedure templates. We're going to go through a checklist and give you roadmaps for your organization. We actually have live implementation classes, recorded implementation classes, and then I'll give you a 1 hour free consultation. That I will give anybody on this webinar, anybody that ever wants it from me. That's always free. It is not free to me. I'm just going to tell you that. If I were to package and sell this, I've done the math. It's $3,100 worth of value that I will give away. Yes, I hope that eventually some or most of you will become clients, but I also know that, you know, if I can help somebody along the way, whether they pay me or not, I'm happy to do that. So it's available to everybody. There are no strings attached. The process for taking advantage of this resource is just to book a 10-minute discovery meeting with me. It's a Zoom meeting. We're going to jump on the phone. I'll ask you some questions. And specifically, I'll be asking you about how you handle security today, how you train your people. I'm not asking to like dig up dirt. I want to know if what we have to offer even makes sense to you. You might have everything handled, and I can say, hey, you know what, pat on the back, go sleep well tonight. You're good. That happens, by the way. And I will definitely tell you that if that happens. Once I've asked my questions, I will be available for any questions you have. These are 10 minutes. My part is 10 minutes. I will stay on the call as long as you need me to if you have questions that you want to go over. And ultimately, the purpose of this meeting is just to find out if we are a good fit. Whether we are or are not, you will walk away with the free resources that I mentioned. If we are a good fit, if we can add value to your organization, then obviously I'm happy to do that. So please take advantage of the free toolkit. Again, the only thing you need to do is go to mastercomputing.com/discovery, fill out the form. We'll jump on a 10-minute web meeting and we'll go from there. Also, you've probably gotten a slew of emails from me reminding you about the webinar. You can just reply to one of those if you want. That's fine too. They come directly to my inbox. So with that, I'm going to wrap. Thank you so much again for joining me. I know that everybody's time is valuable, but I will tell you that I wholeheartedly, passionately believe that the stuff we've talked about today is hypercritical. This is something that we have to stop taking for granted. We have to stop having this head in the sand approach. We absolutely have to start fighting this war on cybercrime so that we can stop losing to these organized crime rings. So have a great day, everybody. And I hope to hear from you soon. Take care.